Hello and welcome to episode 42 of the Sean McGuinness podcast. I am your host, Sean McGuinness. Original name for a podcast, I know. Hope everyone's having a good New Year so far, despite everything else what is going on in the world. But I suppose I will try help as best as I can. Okay, we are in a health epidemic. So, I suppose priming your health and fitness would be a good way to kind of control what you can control outside of all the guidelines, etc. But I always find that, and you can say this controversial, I don't know, some will agree, some won't. I always find it a bit crazy that we're given, obviously, say frontline recommendations on what to do, but that is really it. Like, I don't see politicians talking about how to prepare your health or prepare your immune system or to lower your stress, because ironically, simply stressing, and yes, there's good reason, but chronic physiological stress is going to lower your immune system. Okay, so then if you do catch COVID, you're going to be in a worse position than if you prepared your kind of body or gave it what it's need. It's kind of like going into a fight or a match. Let's say a fight, because the consequences are a little bit harder. It's kind of like going into a fight not having trained versus not having trained but also drinking, smoking, not exercising, just being in a bad state of mind, not sleeping, versus going into a fight having the best food you could have imagined, supplements, sleep, de-stressed activities, exercise, and all this kind of stuff. Your body's going to be in a completely different state to fight it off. So yeah, that's my opinion. So what I'll do is I'll give you my advice, what I can do a little bit to help, which all adds up. Today what we're going to talk about is the training component. Okay, we can say training for fat loss, but you could actually substitute training for just normal general health. We could also put in their muscle building. And you say, Sean, how are you going to put muscle building in? I'm trying to lose fat, like I don't want to get bulky. What we have to remember is the actual training component is going to be pretty central to most things, even in an athletic field. Its central component is what we'll talk about. When it comes to fat loss, maintain your body weight, building muscle, what will change with that is the amount of energy you're giving your body. The training component will stay the same. So let's preface and saying the main training component around any good plan, in terms of all those I've mentioned, is resistance training, weight training. Okay, obviously we're in lockdown now. We're going to go through some practical examples at the end, but let's say resistance, because that just means you can still use your body weight. We'll interchange them both as we go. Fat loss is about losing fat. Duh, Sean. Fucking hell, I tuned in this podcast just for that. I'm not finished. It's about losing fat, but it also is just as importantly about maintaining whatever muscle tone we have, or potentially building some muscle. Because like we talked about before, you're going to lose basically the layers around that muscle, and if you hold on to that nicely, you're going to get a tight toned body. Okay, the muscle tissue is the thing that's going to keep your skin tight, versus if you lose a lot of muscle, like most traditional quote unquote weight loss programs, you're just going to look like a saggier version of yourself. You might weigh less, but because you've lost all of the materials that give your body a nice shape, you kind of look deflated. So that's not the goal, obviously. Versus muscle building, fat loss, the difference between that is because we're not eating over our requirements, obviously to lose fat, we need to be in a calorie deficit, which means we're taking in less energy. Okay, we're burning more than we're taking in. So you don't have any raw materials. You don't have any building blocks to be able to build muscle. Versus if you're trying to build muscle, you obviously need to eat over your calorie requirements in what's called a calorie surplus. So you're giving your body more food or more energy to be able to build that muscle. And obviously that comes with it may gain a little bit of fat as well, etc. So yes, the main components are going to stay the same. What will differ in your results is your nutrition, i.e. the amount of energy, the amount of calories you're giving your body. Okay, so we've established weight training, resistance training is the best form of, makes up the large majority of a successful program, let's just say that. We're going to go over cardio, we're going to go over briefly interval training, some group training, some popular myths. But I'm not one of these people, which I used to be, that says you shouldn't do cardio, you shouldn't do this. There's a time and place for everything. Anyone that has a black and white view about training or about nutrition in most cases is normally uninformed or just wrong. When it comes to weight training, we can kind of group as best we can into certain movements that we should all be doing in the gym. Now, these type of movements, they'll differ in the exact component of that movement depending on the person, depending on their injuries, beginner, intermediate, advanced, how out of shape they are, injury history, how competent they are in the gym, what equipment they have, etc, etc. But let's just look at the main kind of groups that we can group into, and then we can look again how to practically put in place a plan that you can do. So within a resistance weight training program, we're going to have 5 main movements. So we're going to have a hip hinge movement. So that's basically when you're bending from your hips. Okay, just think of Romanian deadlift or a back extension, or deadlift when done right. So your back isn't moving, your back staying straight, your bum is going back, so your pelvis is going back. And then obviously when you bring the bar up, your pelvis coming forward again. So a hip hinge motion. That obviously is going to enable us to work the muscles of the back of the body, the back lower body, glutes, some lower back, some hamstrings. Then we have a squat pattern, squat movement, or also what's called a knee flexion movement. So basically, instead of bending from the hips like we were in a hip hinge movement, now we're just bending from the knees. Okay, so just think of a squat. Think of somebody's nice and upright and they're squatting. The only thing that's moving is they're just bending at the knees, really. That's all. Goblet squat, front squat. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit as best we can to keep it simple about sometimes these movements are a bit of both. So obviously if you look at some people squat and maybe a bit of a hip hinge or a bit of a knee, bit of both. But let's just keep it as simple as possible at the time being. Hip hinge, squat pattern. Then we have a push pattern. So just think of like a push up. Okay. Within this push pattern, we have a vertical push. Okay. And a horizontal push. Vertical is obviously up and down. So let's think of a shoulder press. And then a horizontal push is just like we said, a push up. Then we have a pull pattern. Okay, not that type of pull. Use dirty animals. Which again we can divide into vertical and horizontal. Now I'm not gonna teach you a whole different vocab, but it's just good to know this stuff. So within that vertical pull pattern, just think of a lat pull down or a chin up. Okay, and then horizontal pull, just think of a seated row or any type of rowing motion, barbell row, etc. And then we can have movements for our core, okay, which again encompasses a lot of stuff. It's kind of a word that gets thrown out a lot, And then there's kind of a number of movements within that core. The anti-flexion rotation, we have isometrics. It's kind of different stuff, but I'll try to keep it as simple as possible, because otherwise you'll get confused. And everyone will get confused. Probably start confusing myself. So there you go. So that's the basis movements around the plan. For most people, an average of 3 times a week weight training, resistance training, is a good number. Could be slightly less when someone's a beginner. It could be slightly more when someone's advanced. So they may do 4 days. And the reason for that would be they're trying to maximize either the amount of muscle they don't lose or the amount of muscle they do gain. So if this just depends on how lean someone is. So if someone's very out of shape, they have a lot of body fat, we always have to think the more body fat someone has, the less likely they are to lose muscle. So, because if we think of the ratio of body fat to muscle in a body, say someone has 30% body fat, they have a lot of body fat. So, I don't know, a random number ratio, 10 to 1. They have 10 fat cells for every, whatever. I don't know how I measure them, gram of muscle. 10 grams of fat for a gram of muscle, whatever. When they lose weight, the majority of that is going to come from that fat tissue. Now, as they start to get leaner, the leaner that person is, the higher the potential is to lose muscle. So, for example, someone in that, I don't know, less than 20% body fat range, their rate of muscle loss is going to be higher. So, to protect that as they get leaner, they may need to do 4 weight training days. Same for muscle gain. To maximize that, someone may need to do 4. But let's just stick with the average, because that's going to give the majority of people where they will be at. Now you say, okay, what type of program should I do? Should I do one body part one day, one body part the next, one body part the next after that? And they've kind of seen, ideally we want to hit the same muscle group every, let's say, 3 to 4 days in most cases. So if someone's training 3 days a week, 3 full body days in most cases is probably a good number. Okay, so you're kind of training those movement patterns every day. You mightn't do the same movement, but you do a similar movement pattern. So for example, Monday, Wednesday, Friday we're training hip hinge pattern. We have a push and pull, vertical and horizontal. Obviously that can divide those into 2. We have some kind of knee flexion, a squat pattern, or we have some kind of core. So for example, I'm going to talk about after this how to choose the best type of movement for you in regards to a few different factors that's easy to understand. Hip hinge pattern, we could do Romanian deadlift on a Monday. We could do, say, a hip thrust on the Wednesday. Then we could do a back extension on the Friday. Okay. For a squat pattern, it could be a goblet squat on Monday. It could be a split squat on Wednesday. And then it could be a leg press on Friday. Push pattern, it could be... now, obviously, because we're divided these into vertical and horizontal, we want to cover both of those movement patterns. So on the Monday, our push may be a vertical push. Okay, so maybe some kind of shoulder press. Or if somebody has shoulder problems, which is what we're going to talk about after this, or they have mobility problems, not a lot of people can do shoulder press that well starting off. It may be an incline dumbbell chest press, because it requires kind of less mobility in the shoulders. Or it could be a landmine barbell press. On the Wednesday, then it could be a dumbbell chest press or a push-up. And then on the Friday, it could be a chest press machine. Okay, for our pull pattern on the Monday, it may be a lat pull down. For a vertical, For our horizontal pull on the Wednesday, it could be a seated row, and then on the Friday, it could be another titled dumbbell row. And then for our core, we said squat. For our core pattern, it could be some kind of rotational movement on the Monday. Say, for example, a wood chop. It could be then a dead bug or a hollow hold on the Wednesday. And then on the Friday, it could be a side plank, whatever variation. Again, within the core movements, there's a few different types of movements, so we want to cover all the bases within that. Okay. What we want to think about in the gym is that there's no best exercise. There's no really best machine to use. Everything you see in a gym, for people new to gym, may just seem like random equipment that you're like, I don't know how the fuck to use this. It's kind of like when I used to go into my dad's garage. He was a mechanic growing up. I would go in and just see nothing. There's loads of stuff there, but I don't know what they do. It's just random stuff to me. Obviously, my dad goes in. There's different types of tools. There's different parts. That goes with that. We use that with that. But to me, it didn't look like it. Obviously, that's going to look like a lot of people when they walk in the gym, which is why they probably have a look in the weights area and they go, oh, fuck this, I want to go on the treadmill. That will come with competency of it, obviously, like anything. And just to put people at ease, even when I go in, there's going to be, if you're joining gyms this year, if you're looking up for you're in an area where your gym's still open, you join it and you're probably going to feel intimidated. Listen, I've worked in gyms for the last 8 years, 9 years, weight trained in gyms since I was 14. If you say it stunt me growth, I'm going to smack you. That doesn't, by the way. This joke was so small. And I still get, I still feel awkward going into other gyms. Just because new people, new faces, you think they're looking at you, blah, blah, blah. You get over that. So every different machine or whatever it is a tool. What we're trying to do when we're maintaining muscle. Now also I failed to mention that when it comes to weight training, we're not only making us look better, but a lot of time we're making us move better. We develop, we can say, imbalances of the body from our lifestyle these days, sitting down a lot, where certain muscles get too tight, certain muscles get very weak, and that in itself can cause problems down the line. Back issues are obviously like 70% of some people that sit down. So when we're in the gym and we're weight training, and we're going to talk about briefly mobility and other kinds of stuff in there, stretching, we're trying to move better as well. So ideally we're trying to alleviate niggles, we're trying to alleviate pains that we can control. Certain stuff you'll need more guidance by a physio, etc. But that's what we're trying to do. So we're not trying to go in the gym and look better, and then what we're doing is just giving ourselves injuries every day and blowing out discs. That's not what we're doing. So a good program will encompass you moving better, feeling better, and looking better. That's always my philosophy around training. So everything is just a tool. What we're trying to use is pick the correct tool, or maybe don't pick the incorrect tool, and we can give you kind of a little tick list that says what's the best exercise for you at the moment, encompassing those different movement patterns. For people that are really interested, I was just looking before this. Dr. Pat Davison, I bought his book recently. It's called Rethinking the Big Patterns. There's a lot in it, but for people that are interested in training, I think it's a great resource. And that's his for athletes, but it can encompass obviously people I'm trying to talk to as well. So first, within the movement, let's pick a hip hinge movement. for most people, what we're going to start with is the easiest version of that exercise. Easiest being technically easy, easiest being it's not gonna have a high impact on our body in a bad way. And yeah, that's really easiest, technically easy, so it doesn't require a lot of cueing by a trainer or someone watching you to be able to do it. In his one, he gives a great example of hip hinge, where he'll start with a cable rope pull through. So you probably don't know the name off by heart, but YouTube it after this, and you kind of know what I'm talking about. That's a great way just to actually start to drill that hip hinge movement, because it can be a bit confusing to be able to do. Bending from the hips. A lot of people will bend from the hips, but then they'll also bend from the thoracic, their upper back. They can't maintain their upper back or mid back being nice and static while they bend at the hips. Yes, it can be mobility issue, it can be other stuff in there, but large majority of the time it's just a technical issue, just because we haven't practiced that hip hinge movement before. What I do, I've took that on board, but even in the past, before I heard him say that, I used to use, sometimes I would use a hip thrust, just a glute bridge on the ground, because that's kind of just moving from the hip joint. But what I also do was, I would get someone to stand a few feet away from a wall, or I would just get them to touch the bum off the wall. So they're bending from the hips, they're touching the bum off the wall, and then they're bringing their hips through again, they're standing up straight. You can progress that to them holding a stick on their back, so a foam roller or a stick, touching the back of the head, back of the shoulders, and the back and the bottom of their pelvis. Tell them to keep those 3 points on the stick, with only a little gap between your lower back and the stick, so it's not completely flat, but there's a little curve there, but not too much. And they will basically hinge from the hips, maintaining that. Then the progression from that would be going onto the back extension machine, okay, which is your stationary, your feet are in it and you're bending from your hips. And most people butcher this exercise. So for any trainers out there, this is a great way to actually break the ice and go and talk to people. Shout out Georgia Carey. I think you built half this business of doing this, but it's obviously helping people, because otherwise most people, when they do this movement, they're just bending from their lower back erectors, and then they're coming up and they're jamming their lower back up again. They're not using like the hamstrings and glutes. So go into the back extension, and after this, put the stick on your back and then bend from your hips, just pulling from the back of the leg, squeezing the glutes, maintaining that point of contact. Then from there, the progression after that could be dumbbell Romanian deadlift. Then it could be a barbell Romanian deadlift. Then could be a rack pull. Then could be a trap bar deadlift. And then could be a barbell deadlift. Note the way we're going from easiest to hardest variation. One of the biggest problems I see people training is they copy people who are on the end of that spectrum, whether that's uninformed trainers, whether you're copying people's plans you've got online, and that you are trying to run before you walk. So you haven't got the basics down. You're going into these very technical movements. If you don't have that movement efficiency, and then your technique's going to break down, you're going to get injured, and then you're not going to get what you got out of the gym. You're going to get sore back. So what I'll try to do is I'll put it somewhere. I'm going to post on my Instagram, and I'll put a simple variation of easiest to hardest for each of these movements. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the squat pattern, because that's another one. So the easiest variation, and basically if you're new, you will pick the easiest variation and then progress as you feel accordingly. I think that is the safest way. So for a squat variation, squat movement pattern, we could start with, he starts with, which I like, is either a a squat with your hands in front or holding a plate, squatting down. That's going to allow you to maintain a kind of as an upright torso while you bend from your knees. Now, within exercise, we are all special. We have different mechanics, different limb lengths. We are all built differently. So some people can squat upright nicely, depending on a number of factors. The length of the legs, the length of the femurs, how long their torsos is. So, for example, if we look at like people from the Asian district, typically they can just drop into a squat and keep an upright torso and back straight, and it looks absolutely beautiful. One of the reasons I hypothesize is because they have a long torso. Versus then think of a basketball. They have a long torso in relation to their legs. Versus, and if you want an example of that, look at a baby. Babies have long upper bodies, short legs, so they just drop into a squat because the center of gravity is going to be better. So people say squat like a baby. You can't squat like a baby because you grow up and you grow legs. Versus, say, you think of a basketballer who has long legs and a short torso. Their squat pattern, if they try to do, is going to look more like a deadlift. If that is you find you can't squat without hinging over, start with the plate in front, but you can also start by just elevating your heels. So standing on 1 kilo or 2 kilo plates. That will allow you, that changes the mechanics of that move and allows you to squat more upright. In the most basic way, I'm telling you that. So that could be your first one, a squat or an elevated squat with your hands in front or holding a plate. The next could be a goblet squat, okay, where you're holding the dumbbell in front. Again, when we're holding the weight in front, it's going to be a low risk movement because if our form or technique breaks down, what's the worst thing that can happen? The dumbbell goes in front and throws on the ground. Versus someone who comes in who hasn't nailed the technique, they go straight onto barbell back squats. Their technique goes, well, think of the repercussions now when your technique breaks down. You have a bar on your spine, okay, and you're going to be on that failed videos on YouTube. So, hands in front squat, holding a plate, goblet squat, again, elevated or not elevated depending on you. Then he puts it, I'll just use his examples. A Zercher squat where you're holding the barbell in front on your elbows. Just Google it there and you'll see. The reason, again, another reason the weights are in front because they force you to brace your core, and keeps your pelvis stable because obviously you're holding onto something. And also that, again, keeps your body upright. Then it could be, let's see some other variations. It could be like where you have 2 kettlebells in a rack position. You could squat from there. Again, starting when the weight's in front. Progress again to maybe front squat. Then it could be a back squat at the end. So again, easiest variation being the hands in front, elevated, all the way, progress, and then the last one is your back squat. Again, think of how when people go, everyone needs to squat, barbell squat and barbell deadlift. No, they need to qualify themselves to be able to do that safely, otherwise they're going to stuff themselves. And that doesn't mean that you have to reach the end of the spectrum. All we're trying to do is pick a movement that will allow you to move in a safe fashion, that will allow us to get resistance on the muscles, that will force us to maintain our muscles. Some people might never barbell back squat. Sorry, that was it. The other one I kind of missed out. A safety bar squat was kind of towards the end. So it could be a Zercher squat, it could be a safety bar squat, and then a front squat. Safety bar squat, if you haven't seen it, I've just ordered one for the home gym, is where the handles are in front. Again, because one of the reasons, it's going to cause you to squat upright. And also a lot of people are very tight in the shoulders, okay? Very tight in the upper back, so they find it hard to grab the barbell when it's behind us. And if we can't grab the barbell properly, we may see that it's going to feed into that form breakdown, and again feed into potential injury risk. Simple ones for the push pattern, the horizontal, could be start with a dumbbell. The easiest movement that requires less technique, the least technique, could be a chest press machine. You literally just sit into it, push it out in front, and come back. Then it could be dumbbell chest press. Then it could be a barbell chest press. The vertical, I always get mixed up between vertical and horizontal, and I have to come back and say which one's the horizon. Okay, yeah, that one. So excuse my kind of dyslexia when it comes to those words. The vertical one could be a dumbbell incline chest press. Then it could be a landmine press. Then the last bit, then it could be like a seated shoulder press, and then a standing shoulder press. Going from less technical to more technical. For a pull, the horizontal could be just a seated row machine, and then a dumbbell bent over row, and then a barbell bent over row. Again, the easiest variation, you have to think that it's our body's being stabilized while we're being able to do the movement we're trying to do. See, if we go to the barbell bent over row, the problem with starting on this is there's so much else going on. So we have to support our body weight, we have to lean forward. Then we have to think about the technique of the row movement. Pull, retract the shoulders, slow on the way down, let our shoulders go forward. So there's too much going on. So we need to nail the movement pattern before we make it kind of more complicated and have more movements in there. Nearly done on this. Then we'll put it all together. So the pull horizontal, we've done the pull. The pull vertical could just be a lat pull down, and then could be a chin up. Okay, and that's our main one. The core, as we talked about, is kind of different variations when it comes to that. We were here all day if we name them. Other movements that people kind of look at, they might look at some kind of breathing movements in there, some core pelvis type movements. Now, on the topic of breathing, I'm actually have a breathing expert, and we're bringing on the end of January, who wrote The Oxygen Advantage and talks about that you should only be nasal breathing and not breathing through your mouth, and how it's causing myriad of problems, which is very interesting. Okay, so there we go. So let's talk about beginners. If I have a beginner, I'm always going to look at the easiest variation of those movements, rewind it, go over that, and then we can progress as we go. One thing I didn't touch on is single leg movements, where you're having like split squats, walking lunges, etc. We do want single leg movements in there because obviously that will allow us to keep some kind of structure, balance between right and left. Now, you'll never achieve perfect structural balance between right and left, but we're trying to mitigate as best we can. We don't always want to be doing what's called bilaterals, when you're using both legs together movements. And then we develop a right leg's taken over, whatever. And we also want to keep single leg movements in there, because when we walk, what's called a gait, we need to have different movements of the hips. Obviously, when we walk, we think of the pelvis kind of rotating. When we do any type of single leg stuff, we're mimicking that, so we're getting the benefit from that as well. We're kind of mobilizing the muscles around the hips, stretching them out, as well as working our pelvis and hips through different ranges, which is what we need. So if someone's very overweight, I probably won't have them doing lots of single leg movement, because we have to think that's more of their body weight they're trying to take on one leg, versus if someone's, as we progress them, we can do more kind of single leg stuff as well. Again, think of if someone isn't proficient in those movements, single leg variation is going to be more technical in the fact they're trying to hold on to the balance, get their balance while we do the movement. So we could slot them in as we go, or someone may be able to start with them straight away. But again, with single leg stuff, just like I said, if we're training Monday, Wednesday, Friday, we might do like a goblet squat for a squat pattern on the Monday. On the Wednesday, we might do a split squat. So we're working that different variation with single leg and both legs in there throughout the week, just to keep it interesting. well, not cheap interest, keep that variability. But there's also, we have to think about, and this may be for a later episode, the progressions within that single leg stuff. So we see a lot of people, and I used to do it as well. Nobody told me. I wish someone pulled me up. Obviously, walking lunges are great, but I never realized the progression that's needed for walking lunges as much. Because when we do walking lunges, we step out, we have to absorb our weight on the front leg, absorb a whole body weight, kind of like a plyometric in a sense. That requires, first of all, that's kind of more impact on our ligaments and tendons and joints and muscles. And it's a higher rate of muscle damage because we have to land, absorb the force, and we're kind of getting more eccentric damage, as well as just more impact. So there needs to be a progression with a single leg movements. If it's starting with a split squat, elevated split squat, and you could be just holding onto the wall while you do it. Then could be a split squat off the ground, and then it could be a Bulgarian split squat. Then it could be a reverse lunge. And then the last bit could be a walking lunge. So you progress your way all the way through. Again, this is why I don't necessarily a big fan of classes that just fucking send out random plans, or trainers that send out random plans. You have to know where the client is and prescribe the most appropriate exercise. In my online coaching, a big problem I had is how could I screen people? Because obviously my face-to-face business, I can screen them, I can see where they're at. And apply the most appropriate exercise that I think in that thing. What I do now is I'll screen them, either get on a video call with them, or have them send me back assessment videos that I have ready. So just be aware of people that you go in, they send you a program, and you go, well, how have you sent me this program? You haven't seen how I move. I haven't seen anything. At the minimum, there has to be different progressions and regressions of that movement. If someone's sending someone a cookie cutter plan, at least do that. But otherwise, you kind of have to be suspect about what's going on. It's kind of like you tell the doctor you're sick and they send you prescriptions for some random medicine. So that's when it comes to single leg movements as well. Just look at all the different types of single leg hip in movement and think, okay, which is the most stable, which is the least technical, which is the easiest to do, and then we can progress our way all the way up within that. One thing which I haven't mentioned, and then we'll put it all together, is, and again, I'm open because I don't want to confuse people. Hopefully everyone's still on track. If you aren't, just email me, message me, and I can explain a little bit better. When we have a hip hinge movement, so we're working the hamstrings, glutes, and lower back. However, there's another way we can also work our hamstrings, and that's by flexing the knee. So think of a lying leg curl within that. So your pelvis is staying straight, but you're using the hamstring behind the knee to move the knee up and move the knee down. Okay, it also plays a role when we're running, etc. So we're moving from the knee within that. So it would make sense then to include some kind of knee flexion for the hamstrings in an overall plan. Think of line leg curls, seated leg curls, Swiss ball leg curls. You can even do leg curls at home. I have a video on my Instagram doing it, where you're lying down the ground and you put some kind of slider, some kind of towel, raise your bum up, and then move your feet out and back. Sliding hamstring curls, whatever they're called as well, for an all-rounded plan. Bands have come below. Okay, people using bands for workouts. I think they have their place, but I think they're being a bit overused in today's world. They're great for feeling the glute med. Okay, so just think when you're pushing, when you're doing your crab walks or you're doing your hip thrusts with the band around your knees, they're good for that, to be able to work those muscles. But I don't think people should be doing whole workouts with them, because all they're doing a lot of the time is limiting your range of motion. And when you don't have they're limiting how much you can move. And then, so I've seen people do them with lunges and other stuff like that. The less range of motion, the less of that muscle you're going to work, the less muscles you're going to work. So they have a place, a small place, same as like some core work at the end. There's some calf raises or some smaller muscles like that. They have a place when it comes to that. But don't overdo it, and don't be girls on Instagram who already have big bums. Don't think it's going to get you a big bum, because again, think of a crab walk, such a little small range of motion, and your glute medians are on the side of your glutes. They're relatively small muscles, so you don't need that. Funny enough, and this is how fucking nuts / sad the fitness industry is sometimes on social media, and with the tools that they sell you when it comes to the bands, because they are in fashion. Louise is walking on the road, and this guy who, I forget his name, I wouldn't name him anyway, but he has a massive following, and he has a bands company, and they've done 100,000 followers, and they do band workouts and post and tell people to buy with their code. He just stopped her and said, look, you have a great bum, can you just come and do this band the workout for us, and we'll put you on video. So they're getting people already good glutes and bodies, and then they're putting the bands on, which is, yeah, so just be aware of that as well. Have the place, but if something's doing whole workouts or doing more than they should, then you always have to say, okay, where are my basic movement patterns and progressions and regressions within that? Biggest mistakes I see when it comes to training would be skipping the progressions of the different movements. So again, you might look at men's health, and I used to do the same thing. So, and I look back and go, fuck, Sean, what were you doing? Come on. But nobody told me. And obviously for the people that could do the more advanced movements, barbell squats, barbell deadlifts, barbell bench press, chin-ups, that was brilliant. But then for the other people, what we're trying to do is, instead of fitting the exercise to the person, wrong way around. Instead of fitting the person, fitting the exercise around the person, we're trying to fit the person to exercise. So we're forcing them into movements that they shouldn't be in, rather than take the person, see what movements they can do, and then give them the appropriate tool. When it comes to weight training, don't necessarily think in terms of calories burned, because if you think of all the rest periods we take, as Phil Lerny says, by the time we're actually training, like in rugby, by the time the ball is actually in play, it's not the whole workout. So you might be in the gym for 45 minutes, but the time you're actually doing it, sets and work, it's probably 20 minutes. But that's fine, because we don't want to focus on calories burned for our weight training sessions, because their job is to maintain whatever muscle we have. We can use our activity outside the gym, or maybe even some little bit intervals at the end or whatever it is, to burn a bit more calories. But don't necessarily think I'm in the gym, I should be puffing the way I am, doing cardio sessions or sweating buckets. That way it's more of a type of muscular burn, muscular failure, lactic acid. You'll still be puffed that way, but it might be a bit different to a cardiovascular workout. For people in the gym, I do like doing supersets, just saves on time, especially for beginners. So for example, if we're doing a hip hinge pattern and a push pattern, we could just pair them up. We could do whatever Romanian deadlift together, then we could do a push up together, and we could superset back and forward, just to save on time, and then maybe increase the calorie burn slightly, even though I told you not to focus on that. But that's what we'll do, and it allows you to get more work in that time. Now let's look at some group training stuff, and then we'll wrap it up and finish everything together. So there's a problem with group training, because again, it's you're trying to fit for everyone, where people are different, they need different variations. So there's some good group trainings out there, more semi-private stuff, where they have a particular program, but then they adapt it depending on each person, versus a lot of group trainings don't do that. the common ones, F45, that kind of stuff, where they come in and you have a workout already made and then it's not adapted as you go. That's when you're going to run into problems, especially because that type of training, we talked before about the kind of risk to reward. So picking the lowest risk exercise, and in turn it's going to give us the highest reward. So our chance of injury is low. This is because maybe the complexity of that movement is low. It's less technical. The problem with a lot of group trainings is they're using very technical movements, and then they're doing it in a way where you're fatigued, so you're going to do the movement even worse. For example, burpees. Someone asked, I put a little joke on my Instagram last night, I never trust people to do burpees and some other stuff. She said, why? So I said, look, it's nothing really wrong with exercise, but it's the application. Most people can't do it properly. And then when they're fatigued, they're going to do it even worse. Your form's going to break down. So be careful of a group training where you're going in and it's like boot camp. Billy boot camp's shouting at you. Keep going, keep going, keep going. But remember, when you're under fatigue and you're doing a movement, your technique's going to get worse, which means the effectiveness of the exercise is getting worse, which means your form is breaking down and the risk of injury is going up. So as fatigue goes up, risk of injury goes up if you're using complex movements. So that's why I'm not a fan of that kind of stuff. And actually, I'll get the people that get injured and then come to me after that. It's normally the type of people that think you need to kill yourself in the gym every day. There's definitely a crowd. It's not sexist, but there's more females in that bracket who mistakenly think you just need to sweat and sweat buckets and kill yourself every day and weights to make you bulky and that kind of stuff. Unfortunately, until they get injured, and then they move along basically. Same goes for CrossFit. Now there's some CrossFits are very good, but the problem is, again, combining fatigue with complex movements increases the chance of breakdown within that movement, which can increase the chance of injury. There's other ones. There's Orange Theory. These are the ones I just wrote down. So someone asked me before. That's may have its place, because now what they're doing is they're getting you fatigued. Yeah, that's no problem. But they're actually using stationary equipment. So they're using bikes. They're using rowers. Now, actually, that's probably how it should be done. If it's a cardiovascular workout, that's how you need to do these movements. Like, stupid proof. So you need to use movements where you get more fatigued, but your form, if it breaks down, you're not going to get injured because you're on a bike. Stupid proof movements, what I like to say. So prowlers, ropes, you can use on that kind of stuff. The problem is there's no muscle retention exercises in that. So there's no structured weight training within the whole week. Now, if they combine that with like a structured plan like we talked about earlier, yeah, it can have its place. Or you could just do it yourself. Okay, how many sets should you need per week? Always start with the minimum dosage. So a lot of people go in, they haven't trained in ages, or they go in as they might be training at home. They might go in the lounge room, and then they might go, I used to do 4 sets of each, so I'm going to do 4 sets. Your tolerance is going to be down. It's like me going out in the sun, and most Irish people over here. And the first day of summer, they go out and get absolutely sizzled. In the same light as someone goes in the gym, hasn't trained, and absolutely fries themselves, and you can't go in the sun, or you can't walk or train for 2 weeks. What you should have done is go out, get a little bit of sun, go back in. Don't get burnt. Go out, build your tolerance up. Don't get burnt. When you go in the gym or you train at home, don't get crippled. Let yourself come back and be able to do the same thing a day or two extra. That's the whole point. So start with the minimum dosage. For some people, it could be 1 set, 2 sets, and then you build it up. On average, when you build your tolerance up, 15 to 20 sets, let's say, per movement is good. So 15 sets. So if we then build it up to, we do 4 sets of a hip hinge movement Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Sorry, I think the recommendations is anywhere from 12 to 15 starting off. My bad. Working up then towards 20. Yeah. So around 12 to 15 sets per movement per week. Again, divided over the week if possible. So if we get 4 sets of a hip hinge pattern, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 3 4s is 12 last time I checked. Okay, and that's your minimum. Well, that's your average sets to maintain muscle. But start with whatever is minimal and then build your tolerance up from there. When it comes to training at home, again, the same concept. That sometimes it's a little bit harder with the pulling movement. So if you could get your hands on like a TRX or suspension trainer, or some kind of bands that way, so you could do some vertical and horizontal pulling. You'd be already doing some horizontal pulling if you're in lockdown. Sorry, bad joke. And yes, and just be careful of the problem with home workouts these days. If you're not doing a lot of pull movements, doing lots and lots of pushing movements can exacerbate sort of the tight chest muscles and tight shoulders, and then potentially give you some shoulder issues because we're not balancing out with those pulling movements as well. So see if you can get what you can do for some kind of rows. Again, I have videos where I'm getting a kilo of flour and I'm doing rows with them, or something heavy, whatever rowing motion you can do. And then the same way those hip hinge patterns, again, you can use heavy school bags, whatever you need to add some kind of resistance there. For the pulling movement, actually, I think for one of the videos, a scroll back is when we were in lockdown in March. I wrapped a towel around the door and I did some rows with that. Be careful not to pull down the door. Okay, so that was the basis. I've covered the main kind of resistance training for weight loss with that, hopefully. We'll do cardio another day and sort of fix that in. But this, in combination with what I talked about last week and your calorie deficit, that is the absolute basis of successful fat loss plan. Forget about all the other stuff. Forget about fancy group training, fancy yogas, fancy Pilates. Forget about boot camps. Forget about Joe Wicks. Forget about all these random workouts you see influencers do. Look at the basic movement patterns we all need to be able to do to balance out the body, and let it move in the most effective manner. Pick the easiest possible version of that. Progress all the way through as you get more competent. If you feel any injuries or you don't think you're doing it, obviously consult someone who's qualified in that field. But that should give you a good start. Ideally 3 days a week on average, 12 to 15 sets per week per movement. Start with the minimum effective dose and then build up from there. Again, this time of year, people make the mistake of going all out too soon, where they try kill themselves and train every day, but don't do that. Okay. So there you go. If you have any questions, please let me know if this was helpful. Rate and review on iTunes and all that good stuff. Just send me a message on Instagram. I love seeing all the messages of all the 2 whole followers that listen to this podcast. And there you go. As I said, I have some great guests lined up, but I feel I wanted to get these few episodes out just to give you some guidance, and then we can start to build on it from there. I don't want to start throwing complex, like more minute topics at you, although interesting, because if you haven't got these basics covered, you'll be spinning your wheels. These are the main big rocks of it, and then we can sprinkle on the smaller rocks as we go. So yes, episode 42 done and dusted. Someone once told me the answer to the universe is 42. I don't know if he's winding me up. Gary Doyle in secondary school. If he's right, you can also DM me, let me know. Otherwise, I'll see you all in the next episode.